Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was reborn as the king of all yokai and got married to Yasaka, DXD, Kuroka, DXD, and Tomoe Kamisama Kiss. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. Rebirth in Crimson. Death wasn't supposed to feel like this. The last thing Naruto Uzumaki remembered was pain, excruciating, all-consuming pain as his body gave out during the final battle. He'd succeeded in his mission, saved his precious people, but at the ultimate cost. Peace for the ninja world, paid for with his life. Yet here he was, breathing, existing. Naruto's eyes snapped open to a crimson sky unlike anything he'd ever seen. Instead of clouds, wispy formations that resembled golden dragons and silver phoenixes danced across the vermilion expanse. He lay on his back in a field of silver grass that whispered secrets with each gentle breeze. "What the hell?" he croaked, his voice rough from disuse. He pushed himself upright, muscles protesting after what felt like years of inactivity. His hands, they looked similar yet different. The same tan skin, but now intricate crimson markings spiraled across his forearms, pulsing with an inner light that responded to his surprise. The landscape around him was both familiar and alien, a forest clearing that could have been anywhere, except for the impossible colors. Trees with bark the color of polished bronze supported canopies of emerald and amber leaves. In the distance, he could make out the silhouette of what appeared to be a city, its spires reaching impossibly high. Naruto closed his eyes, reaching instinctively for the familiar presence of Kurama, the nine-tailed fox that had been his companion for so long. Nothing. The hollow emptiness inside him was jarring, like losing a limb he'd only just learned to use properly. "Hey, fox," he whispered, more out of habit than expectation. "You there?" Silence answered him, but something else stirred within, a different power, wild and untamed. Chi surged through his veins like liquid fire, responding to his call. Naruto gasped as energy crackled around his fingertips, not chakra but something more primal, more elemental. "What is this?" he wondered aloud, watching as the energy coalesced into dancing flames that didn't burn his skin. A twig snapped somewhere behind him. Naruto spun, dropping into a defensive stance that came as naturally as breathing. His body moved with enhanced speed and grace he didn't recognize, but certainly appreciated as three shadowy figures emerged from the treeline. They were humanoid, but only barely. Their skin was ashen gray, eyes glowing like hot coals in the shadows of their faces. Long, spindly limbs ended in claws that dragged through the silver grass, leaving scorched trails in their wake. "Fresh soul," one hissed, its voice like stones grinding together. "Foreign, powerful, not from this realm," another added, circling to Naruto's left. "Smells of fox and human and something more." Naruto's mind raced. These weren't shinobi or any creatures he recognized. "Where am I? What are you?" The third creature, larger than the others, laughed, a sound like glass breaking. "It doesn't know. Boundary crosser doesn't even know what it is." "Doesn't matter," the first said, tensing to spring. "We feast on its essence regardless." They attacked in perfect unison, moving faster than civilian eyes could track. But Naruto wasn't a civilian, hadn't been since he was 12 years old. He ducked under the first creature's swipe, the claws passing close enough to ruffle his hair. The second met with an uppercut that connected with surprising force, sending the creature sailing backward into a tree that cracked from the impact. The third managed to rake its claws across Naruto's arm, awing blood that seemed to glow with an inner light. The wound burned more than it should have, but to Naruto's amazement, it sealed itself almost instantly, faster even than his old healing factor. "What the?" he started, but had no time to finish as all three creatures regrouped for another attack. This time, Naruto didn't just dodge. He reached for that strange new power churning inside him, it flow through his limbs like he once did with chakra. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Power erupted from his body in waves of golden light, his fingernails lengthening into claws, canines sharpening to points. He felt something swish behind him. Tails, multiple tails made of pure energy, lashing the air with crackling force. The creatures hesitated, their coal-bright eyes widening. Kitsune, one hissed. But not just any. Naruto didn't let it finish. He moved, faster than he'd ever moved before, becoming almost a blur of golden light. His fist connected with the first creature's face. And instead of flesh meeting flesh, the creature simply dissolved, its form breaking apart into wisps of dark smoke that dissipated on the wind. The remaining two turned to flee, but Naruto was on them in an instant. One swift strike each, and they followed their companion into nothingness, their final wails echoing through the strange forest. As the threat disappeared, Naruto felt the power recede. The tails of energy fading, his features returning to normal, or what passed for normal in this place. He stared at his hands in wonder. This wasn't the Nine Tails power, nor was it Sage Mode. This was something entirely new. Well, that was impressive, came a melodious voice from behind him. Naruto whirled, dropping back into a defensive stance. The woman who stood at the edge of the clearing was breathtaking. Dressed in a traditional kimono of gold and white, her hair was a cascade of golden blonde that fell to her waist. Her eyes, a luminous amber, studied him with open curiosity. Most striking, however, were the 9 fox tails that swayed gracefully behind her and the matching fox ears that perked atop her head. Kurama, Naruto blurted out stupidly, his mind machin. G connections that couldn't possibly be correct. The woman laughed, a sound like wind chimes. No, though I understand the confusion if you've encountered another kitsune before. She approached with measured steps, power radiating from her in controlled waves. My name is Yasaka, leader of the Yokai of Kyoto. And you, boundary crosser, are quite far from home. Naruto straightened, wary but not immediately threatened. Naruto Uzumaki, he offered. And I have no idea where I am or how I got here. Last I remember, I was. He trailed off, the memories of his death still too raw. Dying, Yasaka supplied gently. Yes, that tends to be a prerequisite for this sort of transition. She gestured to the landscape around them. Welcome to the borderlands of the yokai realm. Not quite the pure spirit world, but certainly not the mortal plane you once knew. Yokai, Naruto repeated, the term vaguely familiar from childhood stories. Like demons and spirits. Supernatural beings, Yasaka corrected. Some might call us demons. Others gods or spirits. The truth is somewhere in between. She studied him intensely. You're unusual, even for a boundary crosser. Your soul bears marks of both human and yokai nature. And something else I cannot quite place. And those shadow feeders you dispatched. They're not easily defeated, even by experienced yokai. Naruto glanced down at his arms, at crimson markings that had begun to fade back into his skin. I don't understand any of this. If I died, shouldn't I have moved on? Gone to whatever comes next? Yasaka's expression softened. The pathways of souls are mysterious. Naruto Uzumaki. Some move directly to rebirth or rest. Others, especially those with unfinished business or exceptional power, find themselves drawn to realms like ours. She gestured toward the distant city. Come with me to Kyoto. I sense you have many questions, and it's not safe for a newly awakened spirit to wander the borderlands alone. Naruto hesitated. Why? Years of ninja training making him cautious of too convenient guides. How do I know I can trust you? Yasaka smiled, appreciating his wariness rather than taking offense. You don't. But consider, if I wished you harm, would I approach openly after witnessing you dispatch 3 shadow feeders with ease? Besides, she added with a mischievous gleam in her amber eyes, I'm rather curious about a soul that carries the essence of a 9-tailed fox yet isn't one of my kind. Call it professional interest. Before Naruto could respond, a high-pitched scream cut through the air from somewhere deeper in the forest. His head snapped toward the sound, every protective instinct immediately alert. What was that? He demanded, already moving toward the source. Wait, Yasaka called after him. The borderlands are dangerous. But Naruto was already running, following the sound with the same determination that had defined his previous life. Some things, it seemed, death couldn't change. The forest blurred around him as he moved, his new body responding with speed and agility that surprised even him. The scream came again, closer now, followed by the sounds of struggle. Naruto burst through a line of trees into another clearing. This one dominated by a small shrine that had fallen into disrepair. In front of the shrine, a young girl, appearing no older than 8 or 9, was backed against the crumbling stone steps. Surrounding her were 5 creatures similar to the ones Naruto had fought, but larger, their coal-bright eyes fixed hungrily on the child. The girl herself wasn't human, Naruto realized. Small antlers protruded from her forehead, and her skin had a faint green tint. "Get away from her," Naruto shouted, not slowing as he charged directly into the group. The shadow feeders turned, hissing in surprise at the interruption. 2 immediately broke off to intercept him, while the others closed in on the terrified child. Naruto didn't hesitate. He reached for that strange new power again, feeling it respond even more readily this time. Golden light erupted around him, forming 2 distinct tails that whipped through the air. He caught the first attacker with a tail, the energy burning through the creature like fire through paper. The second he met with a punch that connected with impossible force, turning the shadow feeder to smoke instantly. "Run to me," he called to the girl, creating an opening in the circle of predators. The child hesitated only a moment before darting forward, moving with inhuman grace despite her terror. The remaining shadow feeders lunged after her, claws extended. Acting on pure instinct, Naruto slammed his palm to the ground. A surge of power rushed from him into the earth, creating a barrier of golden flames that erupted in a circle around the girl. The shadow feeders shrieked as they hit the barrier, their forms sizzling where they touched the flames. The girl reached Naruto, ducking behind him with wide, frightened eyes. "They came out of nowhere," she whimpered. "I was just leaving an offering for my grandmother." "Stay behind me," Naruto instructed, rising to face the 3 remaining creatures. They circled warily now, respecting the display of power but not retreating. "More power here than before," one hissed. "Growing stronger." "Doesn't matter," another replied. "We take both." Double feast. They attacked simultaneously from different angles, trying to split Naruto's attention. But he had faced worse odds against far more dangerous enemies. Moving with fluid grace, he swept the girl up with one arm while extending his other hand, from which a whirling sphere of golden energy formed. Not quite the Rasengan he knew, but something similar in concept if not in nature. "Try this," he growled, driving the sphere into the lead attacker. The effect was spectacular. Instead of simply dissolving like the others, this shadow feeder exploded in a burst of dark energy that caught its companions, shredding them into wispy fragments that scattered on the wind. The clearing fell silent save for the soft crackling of the golden barrier flames, which slowly died down as the threat passed. Naruto set the girl down gently, kneeling to check her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, staring at him with awe. "You're like Lady Yasaka," she whispered, pointing to the fading energy tails. "But different. Your power feels strange." "I'll take that as a compliment," Naruto said with a grin, relieved to find the child unharmed. "It was meant as one," came Yasaka's voice as she stepped into the clearing, her expression a mixture of amazement and wariness. "Though I must say, Naruto Uzumaki, you move remarkably fast for someone new to our realm. And that power." She gestured to the scorched earth where the shadow feeders had been destroyed. "That is not typical Kitsune ability." Naruto stood, keeping a protective hand on the girl's shoulder. "Where I come from, we don't leave people who need help. Doesn't matter what realm I'm in." Something flashed in Yasaka's eyes, approval, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. "Naomi," she addressed the girl, "your mother is worried sick. There's a search party combing the eastern woods for you." The girl, Naomi, ducked her head. "I'm sorry, Lady Yasaka. I just wanted to leave flowers for grandmother's spirit." Yasaka's expression softened. "A noble intention, but the borderlands are not safe for young yokai alone. Even adult yokai travel in groups here." She extended her hand. "Come, let's get you home." Naomi took a step toward Yasaka, then paused, looking back at Naruto. "Thank you for saving me, Mr." Naruto smiled. "Anytime, kid. Just maybe wait for an escort next time you want to visit your grandmother's shrine, yeah?" The girl nodded solemnly, then darted forward to give him a quick hug before running to Yasaka's side. As she did, Naruto noticed a small pendant around her neck glowing faintly, resonating with the same energy he had used. "Your power," Yasaka noted. Following his gaze, it's affected her protective charm. Interesting. She placed a gentle hand on Naomi's head. Child, wait for me by the large maple tree at the edge of the clearing. I need a word with our new friend. Once the girl was out of earshot, Yasaka approached Naruto, her expression serious. Twice now I've seen you display power that defies easy explanation. You fight like a warrior with centuries of experience, yet your soul bears the mark of recent transition. And that energy, it's Kitsune adjacent but fundamentally different. She studied him intently. Who are you, Naruto Uzumaki? Before you came here, Naruto met her gaze steadily. I was a shinobi, a ninja from Konoha. The Jinchuriki of the nine-tailed fox, Kurama. The names felt strange on his tongue now, like relics from another lifetime, which, he supposed, they were. I died protecting my village, my friends. That's the last thing I remember before waking up here. Jinchuriki, Yasaka repeated, testing the unfamiliar word, a human vessel for a spirit beast. That would explain the resonance I feel. She looked thoughtful. And this nine-tailed fox, it was sealed within you. Yeah, since the day I was born. Naruto replied, a familiar pang of loss hitting him as he thought of Kurama. We started as enemies, ended as partners. Friends. Yasaka's tail swished with interest. Perhaps that connection followed you into this life, reshaping your soul during transition. It would explain your natural affinity for Kitsune abilities. She made a decision, nodding once. My offer stands, with new urgency. Come to Kyoto with me. You need guidance to understand what you've become, and we yokai need to understand what your arrival might mean. What I've become, Naruto echoed, looking down at his hands. And what's that, exactly? That, Yasaka said with a slight smile, is what we need to discover. But one thing is clear, you're no ordinary soul, Naruto Uzumaki. You're something new. She gestured toward the city in the distance. Kyoto has the largest collection of yokai knowledge in this realm. If answers exist, we'll find them there. Naruto considered his options, which were admittedly limited. He was in an unfamiliar realm with powers he didn't fully understand and no idea how to navigate this new existence. And if he was honest with himself, the prospect of learning more about these Kitsune abilities intrigued him. All right, he agreed. I'll come to Kyoto. But I want full disclosure. Everything you learn about what I am, I learn too. Deal. Yasaka's amber eyes sparkled with amusement. You're in no position to negotiate, boundary crosser. I'm always in a position to negotiate, Naruto replied with the same stubborn confidence that had defined him in life. That's kind of my thing. To his surprise, Yasaka laughed, a genuine, warm sound. Perhaps it is. Very well, Naruto Uzumaki. Full disclosure it is. She extended her hand. Welcome to the yokai realm. I suspect things are about to become very interesting indeed. As Naruto took her hand, sealing their agreement, he felt a ripple pass through the strange new power within him, almost like recognition or anticipation. Whatever he had become in this new existence, whatever awaited him in Kyoto, one thing was certain, his story was far from over. Unseen by either of them, high in the branches of an ancient tree at the edge of the clearing, a figure watched the exchange with keen interest. Draped in shadows that seemed to cling to them like a second skin, they observed the golden-haired newcomer with unblinking eyes. So, the watcher whispered to the empty air, the prophecy stirs at last. Their fingers traced symbols in the air that glowed briefly before dissipating. The foreign soul with the heart of a fox arrives. Just as foretold, the figure melted back into the shadows, leaving no trace of their presence save for a single black feather that drifted down to the forest floor, disintegrating into ash before it touched the ground. The journey to Kyoto was unlike anything Naruto had experienced before. They traveled not by foot but through a series of ancient torii gats that Yasaka explained were spiritual pathways connecting significant yokai territories. Each passage through a gate brought subtle changes to the landscape, the impossible colors of the borderlands, gradually shifting toward something more familiar, if still unmistakably otherworldly. This isn't the human Kyoto, Yasaka explained as they emerged from the final gate with Naomi between them. It exists alongside it, a reflection shaped by centuries of yokai inhabitation. Humans occasionally glimpse our realm in dreams or moments of spiritual clarity, but the boundaries remain firm for most. The city that sprawled before them was breathtaking. Traditional Japanese architecture dominated, but with impossible proportions and embellishments. Pagodas stretched skyward, their tiers numerous beyond counting. Streets wound like rivers between districts, crowded with yokai of every conceivable form, some appearing almost human, others decidedly not. It's like something out of a storybook, Naruto murmured, trying not to stare too obviously at a group of tanuki drinking sake outside a tea house, their bellies expanding and contracting like balloons. Many of your human storybooks began as glimpses of our reality, Yasaka said with a smile. Come, we'll return Naomi to her mother, then proceed to my compound. The elders will want to meet you. Elders? Naruto asked, suddenly wary. The oldest and most powerful yokai in Kyoto. Yasaka explained. They serve as advisors, though as leader of the Kyoto yokai, final decisions rest with me. She gave him a sidelong glance. They'll be intensely curious about you. Great, Naruto muttered. More politics. This drew a surprised look from Yasaka. You've had experience with political maneuvering. Enough to last a lifetime, Naruto replied dryly, thinking of his years navigating the complex politics of the ninja world, especially after the war. Wasn't my favorite part of the job. Yasaka inquired as they made their way down a busy street. Yokai of all descriptions moved aside respectfully at her approach, many bowing or offering greetings. I was Hokage, leader of my village, Naruto said, the words bringing a bittersweet pang. Spent most of my life working toward it, too. Yasaka's eyes widened slightly. A leader in your previous life. That explains your command presence. The ease with which you take charge. She looked thoughtful. The elders will find that particularly interesting. Naruto was about to ask why when they arrived at a modest but beautifully maintained home. Before they could announce themselves, the door slid open violently, and a woman who resembled an older version of Naomi rushed out. Naomi, she cried, gathering the child into a fierce embrace. Where have you been? We've been searching everywhere. I'm sorry, mother, Naomi said, her small antlers drooping with shame. I went to grandmother's shrine, but shadow feeders came, and... Shadow feeders, the mother gasped, immediately checking her daughter for injuries. How did you escape? He saved me, Naomi said, pointing at Naruto. He fought them off with golden fire, just like Lady Yasaka's but different. The mother looked up, noticing Naruto for the first time. Her eyes widened as she took in his appearance, lingering on the fading markings on his arms. She immediately prostrated herself. Thank you for saving my daughter, Great One, she said. Her voice trembling. Our family is in your debt. Naruto shifted uncomfortably. Hey, no need for that. Anyone would have done the same. Please, stand up. The woman rose hesitantly, still keeping her head bowed. Few would challenge shadow feeders for a child not their own. You have our eternal gratitude. She finally looked at Yasaka, realization dawning. Lady Yasaka, forgive me. I didn't immediately recognize. Yasaka waved off the apology. Your concern for your daughter comes first, as it should. Naomi is safe now, but please ensure she understands the dangers of the borderlands. Even in these times of relative peace, there are threats that prey on the unwary. Of course, Lady Yasaka. It won't happen again. The mother bowed once more to both of them before ushering Naomi inside. Though the girl waved cheerfully to Naruto before the door closed. As they continued toward the heart of the city, Naruto noticed the reactions of passers-by changing. D seemed to be spreading about the newcomer accompanying their leader. Some yokai looked curious, others wary, and a few, particularly those with vulpine features, showed distinct signs of recognition. As if they sensed something familiar in him. They can feel your power, Yasaka explained quietly. Especially the kitsune. You radiate an energy signature similar to ours but with harmonics they can't place. It makes them uneasy. Story of my life, Naruto remarked with a wry smile. Never quite fitting in anywhere. Yasaka gave him a thoughtful look. Was that your experience as this, Jinchuriki? For a long time, yeah. Naruto's expression grew distant. When you've got a destructive force sealed inside you that once rampaged through your village, people tend to keep their distance. Yet you became their leader. Yasaka noted. That suggests a remarkable transformation in how you were perceived. Naruto shrugged. People change when you give them a reason to. Save the world a couple of times. And suddenly everyone wants to be your friend. There was no bitterness in his tone, only a kind of amused acceptance. They approached a large compound surrounded by a wall of polished black stone veined with gold. The massive gates were carved with intricate scenes of kitsune in various forms, from fully fox to mostly human. 2 guards stood at attention, both bearing the same 9 tails as Yasaka. Though their fur was silver rather than gold. Lady Yasaka, they greeted in unison, bowing deeply. Their eyes flicked to Naruto, widening slightly before they controlled their expressions. Prepare the Hall of Elders, Yasaka instructed, and send word to the 5 tails and 7 tails. Their presence is requested immediately. Yes, Lady Yasaka, one guard replied, disappearing in a flash of silver light. The remaining guard opened the gate, revealing a stunning garden that seemed to exist in perpetual autumn, the most beautiful autumn imaginable, with trees in perfect shades of gold, crimson, and bronze. Stone pathways wound between reflecting pools where koi of impossible colors swam in lazy circles. This is beautiful, Naruto said honestly as they walked through the garden. Thank you, Yasaka replied. Each leader of the Kyoto yokai shapes the compound according to their nature. This has been my contribution. She looked around with quiet pride. Eternal autumn, the season of transition and reflection. A reminder that change is constant yet beautiful. They approached the main building, a sprawling structure of traditional design but imposing scale. Inside, Vance, mostly fox yokai of varying tail numbers, moved with quiet efficiency. All stopped to bow as Yasaka passed, their curious gazes lingering on Naruto. Before we meet the elders, Yasaka said, leading him down a side corridor. You should refresh yourself. Your transition to our realm was unconventional, and you still bear traces of the borderlands. She slid open a door to reveal a spacious room with a private bath. Clean clothing will be provided. Take your time, the elders won't assemble for another hour. Naruto nodded gratefully. Now that she mentioned it, he did feel distinctly grimy. As if the very air of the borderlands had left a residue on his skin. Thank you. One more thing, Yasaka added, pausing at the door. The elders will likely test you. Your patience, your temperament, your power. They are not malicious, but they are cautious about unknown quantities. Her amber eyes held his. Just be yourself, Naruto Uzumaki. That seems to have served you well so far. With that advice, she left him to prepare for what would undoubtedly be a challenging introduction to yokai society. The bath was heavenly, the water infused with herbs that seemed to draw out fatigue he hadn't even realized he was carrying. As Naruto sank into the steaming pool, he took his first real moment to process everything that had happened. Death, rebirth, new powers, a new world filled with spirits and creatures from legend. So much for the peaceful afterlife, he muttered to himself, but without real regret. If he was honest, eternal peace probably would have bored him eventually. He had never been good at sitting still. Still, there was loss to process. His friends from Konoha. What had happened to them after his death? Had they mourned him? Moved on? Were they even still alive? Had centuries passed in the human world while he drifted between realms? And Kurama? Where was his old partner now? Had the fox been reborn somewhere too, or had their separation upon Naruto's death been permanent? The questions circled without answers, and Naruto eventually set them aside. The one lesson he'd learned through all his hardships was that dwelling on what couldn't be changed only wasted energy better spent on moving forward. He emerged from the bath to find the promised clothing laid out, a simple but elegant kimono in deep blue with subtle orange accents, as if someone had intuited his color preferences. It fit perfectly, another small mystery to add to the growing list. A light knock at the door announced a young kitsune servant, barely into adolescence with just 3 tails. Lady Yasaka sent me to guide you to the Hall of Elders, she said, keeping her eyes respectfully lowered. They are assembled and waiting. Lead the way, Naruto replied, squaring his shoulders. Whatever tests these elders had in mind, he'd faced worse, much worse. The Hall of Elders proved to be a vast circular chamber with a domed ceiling painted to resemble the night sky. Not just painted, Naruto realized as he looked closer. But somehow capturing actual starlight that twinkled and moved in real constellations. Around a crescent-shaped table sat 7 yokai of varying appearances, all Radiating power that made the air in the chamber feel heavy. Yasaka occupied a slightly elevated seat at the center of the crescent, with 3 figures to her left and 3 to her right. Naruto Uzumaki, she announced formally. I present to you the Council of Elders. An ancient tanuki with fur gone silver with age spoke first. The boundary crosser who smells of fox yet isn't kitsune. Fascinating. His voice was surprisingly robust for his apparent age. I am Genshin, elder of the Tanuki clan. To his left, a woman with the lower body of a serpent inclined her head. Orochi of the serpent yokai. Her forked tongue flicked out briefly, tasting the air. Your power has unusual flavors. Next came a Tengu with impressive black wings and a prominent beak. Sojobo, representative of the Tengu Mountains. His sharp eyes missed nothing as they catalogued Naruto's every feature. On Yasaka's right sat a woman of ethereal beauty whose form seemed to shimmer like water. Mizuchi of the Dragon Streams. Her voice was melodious, almost hypnotic. Welcome, stranger from beyond our borders. Beside her, a massive figure that seemed composed entirely of living shadow nodded gravely. Kage Oni, eldest of the Shadow tribes. Unlike the Shadow Feeders Naruto had fought, this being radiated dignity and ancient wisdom. The final elder was perhaps the most human-looking of the group, a woman of regal bearing with white hair and 7 fox tails. Inari's hand, representative of the northern kitsune. Her gaze was the most intense of all, seeming to look through Naruto rather than at him. Approach, Naruto Uzumaki, Yasaka instructed, gesturing to a position in the center of their crescent. Share with the council how you came to our realm. Naruto stepped forward, feeling the weight of their combined attention. For a moment, he considered how best to present his story. Diplomatic phrasings, careful omissions, the political dance he'd learned as Hokage. Then he remembered Yasaka's advice, just be yourself. So he did. He told them everything, from his birth as a Jinchuriki to his death protecting his village. He explained the ninja world, chakra, his relationship with Kurama, and his awakening in the borderlands. He held nothing back, answering their occasional questions directly and honestly. When he finished, silence hung in the chamber for several long moments. Finally, Sojobo the Tengu elder spoke. A human who contained a 9-tailed spirit fox, now reborn with kitsune abilities. The implications are significant. Indeed, Orochi hissed, particularly in light of certain prophecies. Yasaka shot the serpent yokai a warning glance, but Inari's hand leaned forward with interest. You speak of the boundary prophecy. You believe this outsider could be. We should not jump to conclusions. Kage Oni interrupted, his voice like distant thunder. Many have misinterpreted the ancient words before. Yet none have matched the description so precisely, Mizuchi countered. A foreign soul with the heart of a fox, arriving during the reign of the 9-tailed queen, bearing power that mirrors but transforms our own. She gestured to Naruto. We cannot ignore the parallels. Naruto looked between them, confusion evident. I'm sorry, but what prophecy are you talking about? The elders exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, Yasaka nodded. The boundary prophecy is an ancient text, predating even our oldest council members. It speaks of a time when the barriers between realms would thin, and a soul not born of our world would arrive bearing transformed power. And this matters. Why? Naruto pressed. Genshin the Tanuki chuckled. Because, young one, the prophecy states this boundary crosser will either save our realm from its greatest threat or become that threat. He stroked his silver fur thoughtfully. The text is frustratingly ambiguous on that point. Great, Naruto muttered. Another prophecy about me. Just what I needed. This drew surprised looks from several elders, and Yasaka raised an eyebrow. You've been the subject of prophecy before. Child of prophecy, savior of the world, reincarnation of ancient power, take your pick. Naruto replied with a hint of weariness. I've had enough prophecies for one lifetime. Was hoping death might give me a break, but apparently not. Unexpectedly, this drew a utter from several of the elders, a tension-breaking moment that shifted the atmosphere in the chamber. I begin to see why he crossed the boundary intact, Inari's hand remarked. Such directness is rare and refreshing. And dangerous, Orochi added, though with more curiosity than malice. What shall we do with him, then? I vote we observe, Mizuchi suggested. Allow him time to acclimate to our realm. Learn to control his new abilities. Under supervision, Kage Oni added firmly. Power such as his, untrained, could cause significant disruption. I agree, Yasaka said. He will remain here, in my compound, where I can personally oversee his transition and training. She looked at Naruto. Unless you object. Naruto considered his options. He had no home in this realm, no knowledge of its workings or dangers. Yasaka had been straightforward so far, and her offer seemed genuine. Plus, he was intensely curious about these new abilities and what they might mean. No objections, he agreed. But I want to know more about this prophecy. The full text, not just vague warnings about being either savior or threat. Fair enough, Yasaka conceded. The archives will be open to you, under supervision, of course. The council seemed satisfied with this arrangement, though Naruto noticed Orochi watching him with particularly calculating eyes. There was something in the serpent Yokai gaze that reminded him uncomfortably of Orochimaru, that same hungry assessment of potential power. As the meeting concluded, Naruto couldn't shake the feeling that he'd stepped into something far more complex than a simple afterlife. Prophecies, politics, power dynamics, it seemed death had delivered him from one complicated world straight into another. Yet as he followed Yasaka from the chamber, a strange sense of purpose stirred within him. Whatever this new existence held, whatever role this prophecy cast him in, one thing remained constant, his determination to forge his own path, prophecies be damned. Outside the council chamber, as twilight painted Kyoto's yokai realm in shades of gold and crimson, Naruto paused to look at the impossible sky. Stars were beginning to appear, constellations he didn't recognize arranged in patterns that seemed to tell stories he couldn't yet read. Second chances are rare, Naruto Uzumaki, Yasaka said softly, following his gaze upward. Even rarer, for souls to cross boundaries with their essence intact. Whatever brought you to our realm, I suspect it was no accident. Naruto thought about all the twists and turns his first life had taken, the improbable victories, the narrow escapes. The bonds formed against all odds. It never is, he replied simply. In the gathering darkness, unseen by either of them, a pair of glowing eyes watched from the shadows of a nearby pagoda. The observer's lips curved in a smile that held no warmth, only calculation. So it begins, they whispered. The final pieces move into position at last. Slender Finge. RS traced a symbol in the air, a circle bisected by a jagged line. The symbol flared briefly with sickly green light before fading into nothing, carrying its message to destinations unknown. The watcher melted back into the shadows, leaving no trace behind save for a single scale that glittered momentarily in the starlight before dissolving into dust. The game was set, the prophecy awakened. And Naruto Uzumaki, once ninja, now something else entirely, stood at the center of it all, unaware that forces far older than he had been waiting for his arrival for a very, very long time. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Fox and Flames. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training grounds of Yasaka's compound. Dew sparkled on the silver grass like scattered diamonds, giving the entire area an ethereal quality. In the center of a ring marked by polished stones, Naruto stood with his eyes closed, focusing on the strange energy that flowed through his veins. Again, Yasaka instructed from the edge of the ring. Feel the difference between your old power and the new. Chakra was a combination of physical and spiritual energy, governed by control and intent. Yokai power springs from your essential nature, what you are rather than what you do. Naruto exhaled slowly, reaching inward. After a week in the yokai realm, he'd made progress, but mastering these new abilities proved challenging. The power responded differently, following emotional currents rather than precise hand signs or mental constructs. It's like trying to grab smoke, he muttered, frustration edging his voice. You're still thinking like a human, Yasaka replied, her 9 tails swaying gently behind her. Stop trying to command the power. Let it express you instead. Naruto opened his eyes, meeting her patient gaze. That makes no sense. A small smile curved Yasaka's lips. Perhaps a demonstration would help. She stepped into the ring, her movements graceful and measured. Attack me. Naruto hesitated. Are you sure? I don't have great control yet. Precisely why you should attack without holding back, she replied calmly. I assure you, I can defend myself. Shrugging, Naruto charged forward. He moved faster than he would have in his human body, but still with the straightforward tactics of a shinobi. As he closed the distance, he reached for the golden energy within, channeling it into a punch aimed at Yasaka's midsection. She didn't block, she didn't dodge. Instead, she simply wasn't there. Naruto's fist passed through an afterimage as Yasaka's form dissolved into dancing flames that scattered and reformed behind him. Before he could turn, he felt a delicate finger touch the back of his neck. "Too linear," she said softly. "You're forcing the energy along pathways you understand, rather than allowing it to move naturally." Naruto turned, finding her standing just inches away. This close, he couldn't help noticing the subtle fragrance that surrounded her, cherry blossoms and something wilder. Like a forest after lightning has struck. "Show me again," he said, taking a step back to clear his head. Slower this time. Yasaka nodded and closed her eyes. The air around her began to shimmer, golden energy rising from her skin like heat waves. Unlike his own forceful manifestations, her power flowed like water, responding to subtle shifts in her expression, in her breathing, in the gentle motion of her tails. "Yokai power is the manifestation of our essence," she explained, opening her eyes as flames danced around her fingertips. "Kitsune are creatures of illusion, transformation, and fire. Our abilities reflect this nature." The flames coalesced into a perfect replica of Naruto, down to the skeptical expression on his face. "We don't force the power into shapes it doesn't naturally take. We allow our nature to express itself through the power." Naruto circled the flame copy of himself, impressed despite his frustration. "So what's my nature, then? If I'm not exactly Kitsune but still have these abilities?" The flame Naruto dissolved, the fire returning to Yasaka's hands. "That's what makes you unique, and why your training is challenging. Your soul contains elements of human, Kitsune, and something else entirely." She approached him, reaching out to trace one of the crimson markings that had reappeared on his forearm during his exertion. "These suggest a nature-tied T.O. both destruction and creation, opposing forces in perfect balance." Her touch sent a strange ripple through Naruto's power, like two similar frequencies suddenly aligning. The crimson markings brightened momentarily, and golden energy spiraled around both their arms, intertwining before fading. Yasaka withdrew her hand, looking surprised. "Interesting. Our energies resonate. Is that normal?" Naruto asked, still feeling the echo of that connection. "Between Kitsune of similar power, yes. Between a Kitsune and whatever you are." She shook her head. "No, not typical at all." Her amber eyes studied him with renewed interest. "Try again, but this time, don't think about what you want the power to do. Think about who you are, your core self." Naruto closed his eyes, considering the question. Who was he? In his previous life, he'd been defined by his determination, his unwillingness to give up, his need to protect others. He'd been a container, a weapon, a leader, a friend. He'd been a bridge between opposing forces, a harmonizer of conflicts. As these thoughts crystallized, the power within him shifted, responding not to his attempts to direct it but to the self-knowledge underlying his reflections. Heat bloomed across his skin, not painful but intense, like standing too close to a fire. "Yes," Yasaka's voice came, soft but encouraging. "That's it. Your essence is emerging." Naruto opened his eyes and gasped. Golden energy surrounded him, not in the chaotic bursts of his earlier attempts, but in controlled, concentric circles that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. More s. Surprising were the forms taking shape within the energy, not just fox tails, but other patterns, spiral vortices, leaf-like symbols, and rippling waves that resembled the chakra cloaks he'd once manifested. "Your power reflects your past and your present," Yasaka observed, circling him. "Fascinating. You're neither fully human nor fully yokai, but something that bridges both, adapting, integrating, transforming." The energy faded gradually as Naruto's concentration broke, but for the first time, the dissipation felt natural rather than like a failure of control. "I think I'm starting to understand," he said, examining his hands where faint traces of the energy still flickered between his fingers. "It's not about forcing the power into familiar patterns. It's about letting it reflect who I really am." Yasaka smiled, genuine approval warming her amber eyes. "Precisely. Most yokai spend decades learning that lesson. You've grasped it in a week." Fast learner, Naruto replied with a grin. Always have been, when it matters. Indeed. Yasaka glanced toward the compound, where a servant was approaching with swift, purposeful steps. It appears our training session must end. Duties call. The servant, a four-tailed kitsune with russet fur, bowed deeply. Lady Yasaka, the preparations for tonight's diplomatic gathering require your attention. The emissaries from the dragon clans have arrived early, and there is tension with the Tengu delegation. Yasaka sighed softly. Of course there is. She turned to Naruto. Continue practicing what you've learned. I must attend to this matter. Actually, Naruto said, I'd like to come with you. This drew surprised looks from both Yasaka and the servant. The diplomatic gathering is for established yokai leaders and emissaries, the servant said. A note of disapproval in her voice. It would be inappropriate for a what? Naruto asked, his tone light but his eyes challenging. Newcomer, outsider, former Hokage who spent years mediating conflicts between stubborn clans with centuries of grudges. He turned to Yasaka. I know I'm still learning about yokai society, but diplomacy is diplomacy. Maybe I can help. Yasaka studied him, head slightly tilted. Your experience could indeed be valuable, she acknowledged after a moment. And having you present would provide a unique perspective. A small smile touched her lips. Besides, I'm curious to see how you navigate yokai politics. The servant looked scandalized but knew better than to argue with her mistress. I'll inform the staff to prepare appropriate attire for Uzumaki-san, she said stiffly before departing. She doesn't approve, Naruto observed once they were alone. Michi is a traditionalist, Yasaka replied with a slight shrug. She believes in proper protocols and established hierarchies. Your presence disrupts both. Story of my life, Naruto said with a chuckle. So, what exactly is this gathering about? They began walking toward the main compound, passing through gardens where lesser kitsune tended to exotic plants that seemed to respond to their presence, blooming or shifting colors as they passed. It's a seasonal conclave, Yasaka explained. Representatives from all the major yokai clans gather to discuss issues affecting our realm. Territorial disputes, human-world interactions, supernatural phenomenon, and so forth. Her expression grew more serious. This particular gathering is significant. There have been disturbances along the boundaries between realms, weakening in places where they should be strong. Like where I crossed over? Naruto asked. Perhaps related, yes. Yasaka nodded to several yokai servants who bowed as they passed. There are also political tensions to address. Not all yokai approve of my leadership style. Which is? Yasaka's tails swished thoughtfully. Progressive, by yokai standards. I believe in cooperation rather than isolation, adaptation rather than rigid tradition. Some older yokai clans find this approach threatening. Let me guess. They prefer the good old days when yokai terrorized humans and demanded offerings and sacrifices. Naruto's tone was dry. This drew a surprised laugh from Yasaka. You understand more than you let on. Yes, there are factions that believe we should reclaim our position of dominance in the human world rather than existing alongside it in balanced separation. They reached the main building, where activity had increased noticeably. Servants hurried to and fro, carrying decorations, food, and what appeared to be ceremonial items. The gathering begins at sunset, Yasaka said. Until then, I suggest you learn what you can about the various factions that will be present. The library is at your disposal. She paused, giving him a measuring look. And Naruto, tonight, observe before involving yourself. Yokai politics can be quite literally fatal to the unwary. With that warning, she departed to attend to her duties, leaving Naruto to wonder exactly what he'd volunteered for. The library of Yasaka's compound was unlike any Naruto had seen before. Books bound in materials he couldn't identify lined walls that seemed to stretch endlessly upward. Some volumes floated gently between shelves of their own accord, while others remained chained in place, faint whispers emanating from behind their covers. May I assist you, Uzumaki-san? Asked a soft voice. Naruto turned to find an elderly yokai watching him with milky eyes. Despite his apparent blindness, the old man's gaze seemed to track Naruto perfectly. I'm looking for information on yokai political factions, Naruto explained, particularly those who might oppose Yasaka's leadership. The librarian's bushy eyebrows rose slightly. A sensitive topic for one so new to our realm. He shuffled forward, his cane tapping a rhythmic pattern on the polished floor. But knowledge is neutral, even when its applications are not. He gestured for Naruto to follow. This way. They moved deeper into the library, the ambient light dimming as they left the main chamber. The old yokai led him to a circular room where scrolls rather than books dominated the collection. Political histories, the librarian explained, waving a gnarled hand at the shelves. More reliable than the gossip you might hear at tonight's gathering, though perhaps less entertaining. A smile creased his weathered face. I suggest beginning with factional divisions in the Heian era, and proceeding chronologically. The contemporary situation will make more sense with historical context. Naruto thanked him, settling into a comfortable chair as the librarian shuffled away. Despite never having been much of a reader during his life in Konoha, Naruto found himself absorbed in the yokai histories. They painted a picture of a society far more complex than human legends suggested, with intricate power structures, ancient rivalries, and philosophical divisions that spanned millennia. Hours passed as he pieced together an understanding of the current political landscape. Yasaka, it seemed, represented a progressive faction that had gained prominence during the last century, advocating for a more balanced relationship with the human world and other supernatural realms. Her ascension to leadership had been contested by traditionalists who believed yokai should maintain their superiority through strength and fear. Most intriguing were the references to external forces that influenced yokai politics, particularly something called the Takamagahara faction, which seemed to represent divine interests rather than yokai ones. References to this group were frustratingly vague, but they appeared to favor the traditionalist yokai, perhaps as a check against growing yokai autonomy. Interesting reading choice, came a melodious voice, interrupting his studies. Naruto looked up to find a kitsune woman he hadn't met before. She resembled Yasaka in her regal bearing, but where Yasaka's coloring was golden. This woman's 7 tails were a pristine silver, matching her long hair. He recognized her as Inari's hand, the northern kitsune representative from the Council of Elders. Just trying to understand the landscape, Naruto replied, closing the scroll he'd been reading. I find it's better not to walk into a situation blind. Wise, the elder kitsune said, appraising him with keen eyes. Huff yokai politics would take lifetimes to fully comprehend. We are creatures of long memory and longer grudges. Naruto smiled ruefully. That sounds familiar. Ninja clans weren't so different. Indeed. Inari's hand moved closer, her tails swishing with interest. Yasaka speaks highly of your diplomatic experience. I admit, I'm curious how a human leader might view our complexities. With fresh eyes, maybe, Naruto suggested. Sometimes an outsider sees patterns that those involved miss. And what patterns do you see, Naruto Uzumaki? He considered how much to reveal, then decided directness was the best approach. I see a society caught between tradition and change, with outside forces trying to influence the outcome. I see Yasaka walking a difficult line between progress and respect for the past. He met the elder's gaze steadily. And I see factions willing to use tonight's gathering to advance their own agendas, possibly at her expense. Inari's eyes widened slightly. Then she laughed, a sound like silver bells. Perceptive indeed. I begin to understand why the prophecy might center on you. She moved to leave, then paused. A word of advice, boundary crosser. Watch the Serpent Clan tonight. Their loyalty shifts with the wind, and lately, that wind blows cold. Before Naruto could ask for clarification, she was gone, leaving only the faint scent of winter forests in her wake. With sunset approaching, Naruto returned to his quarters to find elaborate clothing laid out for him, a formal kimono in deep blue with subtle patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. Accompanied by a haori jacket in a slightly lighter shade. The ensemble was completed by a obi sash in a burnt orange that reminded him of his old jumpsuit, a touch that made him smile. As he dressed, he contemplated what he'd learned and what it might mean for the evening ahead. If the histories were accurate, tonight's gathering would be more than a simple diplomatic exchange. It would be a battlefield of words and posturing, with real power at stake. A knock at his door announced Michi, the servant who had so disapproved of his inclusion earlier. Lady Yasaka requests your presence, she said formally. The guests have begun to arrive. Naruto followed her through the compound, now transformed by lanterns that floated in midair, casting warm golden light over Ga. Are dens where cherry trees bloomed out of season, their petals drifting like pink snow. Yokai of all descriptions mingled in the open spaces, their forms ranging from nearly human to decidedly otherworldly. Michi led him to a large pavilion that had been erected in the central garden. Inside, the gathering was already in full swing, a kaleidoscope of supernatural beings engaged in the universal active eddies of political events, forming alliances, exchanging gossip, and positioning for advantage. "Ah, Naruto," Yasaka's voice came from his right. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd lost yourself in the library." Naruto turned and momentarily lost the ability to speak. Yasaka was dressed in a kimono of crimson and gold that complemented her coloring perfectly, her golden hair elaborately styled with ornaments that chimed softly when she moved. Her 9 tails, groomed to a glossy perfection, framed her like a royal mantle. "You look," he began, then cleared his throat. "That is, the compound looks amazing." A knowing smile touched Yasaka's lips. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself." She offered her arm. "Come, there are people you should meet." The next hour was a whirlwind of introductions. Naruto met yokai leaders from across Japan, Tengu lords with their proud wings and sharp gazes, dragon representatives whose scales shimmered with iridescent colors, tanuki elders whose jovial manners masked shrewd political minds, and many others whose nature he could barely comprehend. Throughout it all, Yasaka maintained a perfect balance of authority and graciousness, navigating complicated protocols with effortless grace. Naruto found himself admiring her political acumen. She was a natural diplomat, using the right words to smooth ruffled feathers or gentle wounded pride. Quote, "The Dragon Clan has been waiting 3 centuries for an apology from the Tengu over a territorial dispute," she explained quietly as they moved between groups. "Neither will officially back down, but if they happen to share sake poured by a neutral third party, it creates an opening for dialogue without loss of face." "Sounds exhausting," Naruto remarked, watching as the subtle maneuver she'd engineered played out exactly as planned. "It can be," she admitted. "But it's necessary. These gatherings maintain the balance that keeps our realm stable." Her amber eyes scanned the crowd, alert for any signs of discord. "Speaking of balance, we should greet the serpent delegation. They've been watching you all evening." She guided him toward a group of yokai whose human forms were betrayed only by the vertical pupils of their eyes and the subtle pattern of scales visible along their necks and hands. Their leader, a tall man with hair the color of polished obsidian, smiled as they approached, a smile that never reached his cold eyes. "Lady Yasaka," he greeted, his voice smooth and melodious. "A magnificent gathering, as always. You honor us with your hospitality." "Lord Ryusaki," Yasaka replied with equal formality. "Your presence honors us in return. May I present Naruto Uzumaki, recently arrived in our realm and under my protection." Ryusaki's gaze shifted to Naruto, that empty smile never wavering. "The boundary crosser we've heard so much about. How fascinating." He studied Naruto with unnerving intensity. "They say you were a vessel for a fox spirit in your previous life. A human container for yokai power. Some might consider that unnatural." The deliberate provocation was obvious, but Naruto merely smiled. "Some might consider death a conclusion rather than a transition, yet here we are. I find natural as often just another word for familiar." A flicker of surprise crossed Ryusaki's features before his mask of politeness returned. "Eloquently put. I see why Lady Yasaka finds you interesting." His gaze returned to Yasaka. "We were just discussing the recent boundary disturbances. My clan has observed several weakening points near our ancestral territories. Most concerning. All reports of boundary instability are being investigated," Yasaka assured him. "If your clan has specific information, the council would welcome it." "Of course," Ryusaki said smoothly. Though some wonder if the appearance of powerful boundary crossers might be related to these weaknesses. His gaze slid meaningfully to Naruto. Cause and effect can be so difficult to distinguish. Before either could respond to the veiled accusation, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. A group of new arrivals stood framed in the doorway, their appearance causing a ripple of whispers to spread through the gathering. Unlike the yokai present, these beings had an entirely different quality, a luminescence that seemed to emanate from within rather than reflect external light. Their features were flawlessly beautiful, their kimonos of impossible materials that shimmered like captured starlight. Takamagahara representatives, Yasaka murmured, surprise evident in her voice. They rarely attend yokai gatherings. Divine delegation, Ryusaki said, his tone suddenly deferential. What an unexpected honor. Naruto watched as the newcomers moved into the pavilion. The crowd parting before them like water. Even from a distance, he could feel the power they radiated, different from yokai energy, more rarefied and remote, like the difference between candlelight and distant stars. I should greet them, Yasaka said, her expression carefully neutral. They are technically honored guests, though their presence is unusual. As she moved to fulfill her duties as hostess, Naruto found himself momentarily alone with Ryusaki. The serpent yokai's facade of politeness slipped slightly, his eyes narrowing as he watched Yasaka approach the divine delegates. She plays a dangerous game, Ryusaki said softly, seemingly forgetting Naruto's presence. The old ways exist for a reason. The natural order must be preserved. And what order is that? Naruto asked, deliberately drawing the yokai's attention back to him. Ryusaki's smile returned, though now it held a hint of condescension. Strength rules, boundary crosser. Power defines reality. The strong lead, the weak follow. And the natural hierarchies, human, yokai, divine, maintain cosmic balance. His voice dropped to a near whisper. Those who disrupt this balance eventually face correction. With that ominous statement, he inclined his head in a mockery of respect and moved away, rejoining his delegation. Naruto watched him go, mentally adding Ryusaki to the list of potential threats. The serpent, yokai's words had carried the unmistakable scent of fanaticism disguised as tradition, a combination Naruto had encountered before, and never with positive outcomes. Across the pavilion, Yasaka was engaged in formal greetings with the Takamagahara representatives. Even from a distance, Naruto could sense the tension underlying the polite exchange. The divine beings seemed to look down at Yasaka both literally and figuratively. Their perfect postures radiating a sense of innate superiority. As Naruto observed the interaction, he became aware of a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the gathering. Yokai who had been mingling freely began to form loose groupings, alignments becoming visible in their positioning. The Serpent Clan and several other traditional factions drifted toward the divine representatives, while those loyal to Yasaka maintained their distance, watchful and wary. Political fault lines becoming visible, came a gruff voice beside him. Never a good sign at these functions. Naruto turned to find Genshin, the elderly Tanuki elder from the council, nursing a cup of sake with a deceptively casual air. I thought these gatherings were supposed to be about diplomacy, Naruto said. Diplomacy is just war by other means, young one, Genshin replied with a wry smile. Especially when divine representatives grace us with their presence unannounced. He took a slow sip of his sake. They're here for you, you know. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Me. Word spreads quickly through the supernatural realms. A boundary crosser with unusual power, taken under Yasaka's wing, matching certain prophetic criteria. The Tanuki shrugged his furry shoulders. The Takamagahara faction maintains the boundaries between realms. Your very existence represents either a failure of the IR oversight or something they intentionally permitted. Either possibility would concern them. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he reassessed the divine delegates. What exactly are they? Not yokai, obviously. Lesser kami, Genshin explained. Divine bureaucrats, if you will. They serve the greater gods, maintaining order among the supernatural realms. His voice lowered. They also tend to favor the traditionalist yokai factions, finding them more predictable. The implications were clear. The appearance of these divine representatives wasn't coincidental. It was a calculated move in a larger political game. One that somehow involved him. Across the pavilion, Yasaka had concluded her formal greeting and was moving back through the crowd. Her expression remained serene, but Naruto could see tension in the set of her shoulders, in the controlled swish of her tails. He began, but stopped as Genshin's paw closed around his wrist with surprising strength. Wait, the Tanuki said, his jovial manner vanishing. Something's wrong. Naruto scanned the gathering, his senses, enhanced by his new nature, suddenly alert for danger. At first, nothing seemed amiss, just the continued gling of supernatural beings engaged in political dance. Then he saw it. Subtle movements among the servants, positions shifting in ways that didn't align with their duties. One particular group near He divine representatives seemed to be moving with too much purpose, their forms rippling slightly at the edges, as if maintaining their appearances required concentration. Imposters, Naruto muttered, already moving through the crowd toward Yasaka. He reached her just as one of the suspicious servers approached with a tray of sake cups. Up close, Naruto could see what had escaped notice from a distance. The server's eyes were wrong. The pupils elongated into unnatural slits that matched no yokai type present. Without hesitation, Naruto stepped between Yasaka and the disguised infiltrator, his hand shooting out to grab the server's wrist. I wouldn't, he said quietly, allowing his power to rise just enough to make his eyes glow with golden light. The server's face contorted with surprise, then hatred. Too late, he hissed, his voice distorting as his disguise began to slip. Across the pavilion, several explosions erupted simultaneously. Screams filled the air as hidden attackers revealed themselves, shedding their disguises to reveal twisted forms that resembled yokai but somehow wrong, corrupted versions with grotesque features and malevolent energy. Yasaka, Naruto shouted, pulling her away from the infiltrator as the creature's arm elongated into a blade-like appendage that slashed through the space where she had been standing. Corruption yokai, Yasaka gasped, her own power flaring in response to the threat. They shouldn't be able to penetrate our barriers. The pavilion erupted into chaos. Most of the guests scattered, seeking safety, while others, the stronger yokai leaders and their guards, moved to engage the attackers. The divine representative stood untouched in a pocket of calm, watching with expressions of detached interest as the violence unfolded. We need to evacuate the civilians, Naruto said, falling naturally into tactical assessment. Secure the perimeter and identify how they got in. Yasaka nodded, her leadership instincts aligning with his. My guards will handle evacuation. We need to neutralize the immediate threats. Her eyes tracked the movements of the corruption yokai, who seemed to be converging on a specific pattern. They're forming a ritual circle. We can't let them complete it. Understanding flashed between them without need for further explanation. Naruto dropped into a fighting stance as Yasaka's power erupted around her in waves of golden flame. Together, they launched themselves into the fray. Fighting alongside Yasaka was like dancing with fire. Her movements were graceful yet devastating, each gesture trailing flames that seemed alive with purpose. Where Naruto's combat style had always been direct and powerful, hers was fluid and deceptive, illusions and redirections that left her opponents striking at empty air while real attacks came from unexpected angles. Naruto adapted quickly, complementing her style with his own. He discovered that his new yokai abilities responded intuitively in combat, enhancing his already formidable skills. Golden energy coalesced around his limbs, extending his reach and impact. When he struck a corruption yokai, the energy seemed to purify as it destroyed, leaving nothing but harmless ash in its wake. They moved across the battlefield in perfect synchronization, as if they had fought together for years rather than minutes. Where Yasaka created openings with her illusions, Naruto exploited them with devastating attacks. When enemies tried to overwhelm him with numbers, her flames created protective barriers that bought him space to counterattack. The circle, Yasaka called, pointing to where several corruption yokai had managed to arrange themselves in a specific formation despite the chaos. They had begun a chant, their voices creating discordant harmonies that made the air itself seem to warp around them. Naruto assessed the situation in an instant. Cover me. Without waiting for acknowledgement, he charged directly toward the ritual circle. Corruption yokai moved to intercept him, but flames erupted in their path as Yasaka redirected their attention. With the way momentarily clear, Naruto gathered his power into his right hand, forming a spinning orb that resembled his old Rasengan but blazed with golden yokai energy rather than blue chakra. Whatever you're planning, it ends now, he shouted, driving the spiraling sphere into the center of the ritual formation. The impact was catastrophic. For the corruption yokai, the energy expanded outward in a controlled wave, disrupting the ritual and purifying every corrupted being it touched. They dissolved into ash with shrieks of thwarted rage, their malevolent power dispersing harmlessly. As suddenly as it had begun, the attack was over. The remaining corruption yokai, seeing their ritual disrupted and their numbers decimated, fled through whatever hidden passages had allowed their entry. Guards pursued, but the primary threat had passed. In the aftermath, Naruto found himself standing beside Yasaka in the center of the ruined pavilion. Her kimono was torn in places, smudged with soot, but she looked otherwise unharmed. More importantly, she radiated an aura of undiminished authority, as she began issuing orders to secure the compound and tend to the injured. The divine representatives approached, their perfect appearances somehow untouched by the chaos that had engulfed the gathering. Their leader, a being of indeterminate gender whose beauty was almost painful to behold, regarded Yasaka with cool assessment. An unfortunate incident, they said, their voice like distant wind chimes. One wonders how such corrupted entities penetrated your defenses, Lady Yasaka. The accusation was thinly veiled, but Yasaka met it with composed dignity. A question my security forces are already investigating, Divine One. I assure you, those responsible will be identified. Indeed, the divine being's gaze shifted to Naruto, their eyes, which seemed to contain swirling galaxies rather than normal irises, narrowing slightly. Your new associate performed impressively. Such unusual power for one so recently arrived in our realms. Naruto returned their gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated despite the overwhelming aura of power the divine being projected. I've had practice dealing with unexpected attacks. So it would seem. The divine representative inclined their head slightly. The Takamagahara faction observes with interest, Lady Yasaka. Boundary integrity remains our primary concern, especially in these unstable times. Their eyes flicked meaningfully to Naruto again. We will be watching developments closely. With that thinly veiled warning, the divine delegation departed, their forms seeming to fade into streams of light rather than exiting through conventional means. As they vanished, Naruto noticed Ryusaki watching from a distance, his expression unreadable. The serpent yokai made no move to offer assistance with the aftermath, merely observing. With calculating eyes before he too departed with his delegation. Well, Genshin said, appearing beside them with his fur singed but his spirit undampened, that was the most exciting diplomatic gathering we've had in centuries. Congratulations, Naruto Uzumaki, you've officially entered yokai politics. Surviving your first assassination attempt is practically a rite of passage. Yasaka shot the tanuki a quelling look. This was a coordinated attack, not a political statement. It was both, Genshin countered, suddenly serious. The corruption yokai are tools, not independent actors. Someone them, someone who knew about this gathering and could breach your security. His gaze moved meaningfully toward the direction the Takamagahara representatives had departed. And someone else chose not to intervene until the danger had passed. Yasaka sighed, the weight of leadership momentarily visible in her expression. Theories can wait. First, we secure the compound and care for the injured. She turned to Naruto, something new in her eyes as she regarded him. Thank you. Your quick action saved many lives tonight, perhaps including my own. I did what anyone would do, Naruto replied simply. No, she said, a small smile touching her lips despite the circumstances. You did what only you would do. Charged headlong into danger without hesitation, trusting your abilities and your instincts. She placed a hand lightly on his arm. It's refreshing, if somewhat terrifying to witness. The touch sent that same resonance through their connected powers, golden energy briefly spiraling where their bodies connected. This time, Naruto was certain Yasaka felt it too. Her eyes widened slightly, and something unspoken passed between them before she withdrew her hand. I should oversee the security sweep, she said. Her voice professionally composed once more. Genshin, please gather the remaining council members. We need to assess the damage and respond appropriately. As she moved away to direct the recovery efforts, Naruto found Genshin watching him with shrewd eyes. Interesting, the tanuki murmured. Very interesting indeed. What? Naruto asked, though he suspected he knew what the elder was referring to. Genshin smiled, his whiskers twitching. The prophecy speaks of resonance between powers. The foreign soul with the heart of a fox shall awaken forgotten harmonies. It seems you and our Lady Yasaka create quite the harmony. He chuckled at Naruto's expression. Don't look so surprised, young one. Prophecies have a way of fulfilling themselves in the most unexpected ways. Before Naruto could question him further, the tanuki shuffled off to gather the council members as Yasaka had requested, leaving Naruto to wonder just how much of the prophecy remained unshared. Dawn found Naruto on the roof of Yasaka's compound, watching as the first light painted Kyoto's yokai realm in shades of gold and amber. The cleanup after the attack had continued through the night, with security forces tracking the escape routes used by the corruption yokai and healers tending to the injured. Thankfully, there had been no fatalities, though several yokai had sustained serious injuries. Naruto had assisted where he could, his endurance outlasting many of the yokai guards as they secured the compound. Now, with immediate concerns addressed, he found himself seeking a moment of solitude to process everything that had happened. The sound of soft footsteps on tile alerted him to Yasaka's approach before he saw her. She moved with quiet grace, her formal kimono replaced by a simpler robe of pale gold that caught the morning light. Her hair, freed from its elaborate styling, fell like a golden waterfall down her back. "I thought I might find you here," she said, settling beside him on the roof's edge. "You've hardly rested." "Neither have you," he pointed out. She smiled faintly. A leader's privilege, limited sleep and unlimited responsibility. Despite the quip, weariness showed in the subtle shadows beneath her eyes. The council is convening at midday to discuss the attack. Most of the evidence points to traditionalist extremists, yokai who believe my lead. Our ship has weakened our position by promoting cooperation over dominance. And the divine representatives, the Takamagahara faction? Naruto asked. Their timing seemed convenient. Yasaka sighed, her tails curling around her like a protective cloak. That is, more complicated. The divine realms operate according to their own agendas, most of which remain opaque to us. Their appearance at the gathering was unusual, but not necessarily connected to the attack. She glanced at him. Though their interest in you was unmistakable, why would they care about one boundary crosser? Naruto wondered. Surely souls transition between realms all the time. They do, but rarely with their powers and memories intact, Yasaka explained. Most souls are purified during transition, their essence formed according to the rules of their destination realm. You maintained your fundamental self across the boundary. That alone would interest them, as the maintainers of cosmic order. She hesitated, then added, and then there's the prophecy, which you still haven't shared in full, Naruto noted. Yasaka met his gaze directly. Because prophecies are dangerous, Naruto. They create expectations and assumptions. They narrow possibilities rather than expand them. She looked out over Kyoto, her expression pensive. But you deserve to know what may involve you. She took a deep breath. The boundary prophecy was recorded over 10,000 years ago, by a yokai seer whose visions were never wrong. It speaks of a time when the veil between worlds grows thin, and ancient hunger stirs in the depths. The foreign soul with the heart of a fox shall cross between life and death, bearing power that mirrors but transforms. In resonance with the nine-tailed queen, forgotten harmonies shall awaken. She paused. The prophecy continues, but those lines are the ones that have drawn attention since your arrival. And last night, when we fought together, Naruto began. Our powers resonated, Yasaka confirmed. A harmonization I've never experienced with any other yokai. She looked down at her hands, where faint traces of golden energy still shimmered. It was remarkable. It felt right, Naruto said simply. Natural, like we'd been fighting together for years. A small smile curved Yasaka's lips. Yes, it did. She looked up at him, something unguarded in her amber eyes that hadn't been there before. You're unlike anyone I've encountered in my centuries of existence, Naruto Uzumaki. Your approach to power, to leadership, to life itself, it's refreshing in its directness. I've never been good at being anything but myself, Naruto admitted with a rueful smile. Drove my advisors crazy when I was Hokage. Yet I suspect it made you an effective leader, Yasaka observed. Authenticity has its own power, especially among those weary of political facades. They fell into comfortable silence, watching as Kyoto awakened below them, yokai of all descriptions beginning their daily routines. The realm slowly recovering from the previous night's disruption. What happens now? Naruto finally asked. Now, Yasaka considered the question. Now we continue your training with new urgency. Last night proved you can wield your power effectively in combat, but there's still much to learn about yokai abilities, particularly kitsune illusions and transformations. And the attack, the prophecy. Her expression grew more serious. We investigate the attack, strengthen our defenses, and prepare for the possibility of escalation. As for the prophecy, she shook her head slightly. We acknowledge its existence without allowing it to dictate our actions. The future remains unwritten, regardless of ancient predictions. Naruto nodded, appreciating her practical approach. It reminded him of his own philosophy as Hokage. Respect the past, but don't be imprisoned by it. Acknowledge destiny, but forge your own path. As the sun climbed higher, casting their shadows across the tiled roof, Naruto became acutely aware of Yasaka's presence beside him. The subtle fragrance that surrounded her, the graceful sweep of her tails, the quiet strength she radiated even in moments of repose. Something had shifted between them during the battle, a recognition of complementary spirits that transcended their different origins and natures. You're staring, Yasaka said softly, though she didn't look displeased. Sorry, Naruto replied, not entirely sorry at all. Just thinking that prophecy or no prophecy, I'm glad I woke up in this realm. There are worse afterlives than fighting alongside someone like you. A faint blush colored Yasaka's cheeks, barely visible in the morning light. Such directness, she murmured, but her tails swished in what Naruto was learning to recognize as pleasure rather than discomfort. Before either could say more, a guard appeared on the roof, bowing deeply. Lady Yasaka, forgive the interruption. A messenger has arrived from the northern territories with urgent news. The moment broken, Yasaka's expression shifted back to leadership mode. What news? Reports of boundary disturbances, my lady. More severe than previous instances. And, the guard hesitated. There are accounts of shadow creatures crossing over, larger and more organized than the shadow feeders. They appear to be searching for something, or someone. Yasaka's eyes met Naruto's, understanding passing between them. Assemble my escort, she instructed the guard. We leave within the hour. As the guard departed, Yasaka turned back to Naruto. It seems our investigation begins sooner than anticipated. These boundary disturbances may be connected to the attack, perhaps even to your arrival. Then I'm coming with you, Naruto said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. Yasaka studied him for a moment, then nodded. I would have it no other way. Your perspective will be valuable, and your power may be necessary. Her expression softened slightly. Besides, I find I appreciate having someone at my side who charges headlong into danger without hesitation. It's a gift, Naruto replied with a grin. As they prepared to depart, neither noticed the small esser. Pent coiled in the shadow of a nearby chimney, its eyes gleaming with unnatural intelligence as it observed their interaction. Once they had gone, it slithered down the roof and disappeared into a crack in the tiles, carrying its observations to masters unknown. In the borderlands between realms, something ancient stirred, awakening from long dormancy. Prophecy had begun its inexorable unfolding, drawing together threads of fate that had been weaving for millennia. The foreign soul with the heart of a fox had arrived, and nothing in the yokai realm would ever be quite the same again. Chapter 2 End.